Hello, everyone, and welcome into CrushTheStreet.com. I'm Kenneth Amaduri. And again, we're bringing the top-notch guests on the show with us as often as we can here. And we're hitting it hard here in 2019. And I have on the line an industry expert and CEO of Kutcho Copper, Vince Sorace. Kutcho is a company, really leveraged to what we're now seeing as the exploding price of copper, and we're going to discuss that further today. You got the Trump economy, you got changes going on with things like the Green New Deal and initiatives that are, really set to change the direction of the way business is done here in the U.S. and around the world for that matter. And obviously copper's role in all of this, and of course the mining sector as a whole. So to discuss all of that today with us, Vince, thanks so much for coming on the show with me.
Ken, thanks for having me.
Well, let's start off here. The Trump economy, obviously Trump is more conservative, but we've seen a lot of business optimism, especially once he was voted in, and then, what the economy did since then. And then we also have things like the Green New Deal initiatives from maybe the Democratic side. And obviously we're seeing copper explode as of the last few months here. I really want to talk about this. What are your thoughts on copper? Well, maybe let's start off with this. What are your thoughts on copper and why we're starting to see it pick up, especially right now in 2019?
Sure. So let's talk a little bit about what copper is I guess famous for, if you will. And we have to understand that copper is something that is used in everyone's everyday life. It's all around us. So everything from infrastructure, wires, power grids, electronics, appliances, construction, transportation, renewables. This is what copper is used in. And if you look at basically in the last 100 years, copper's usage has increased over 2,500%, and it's forecast to increase another 43% over the next 10 to 15 years from today. So, everything on the planet as it feeds into the continued population growth of the planet, which is exponential, requires copper. So, from the demand side, that's the biggest driver. Then you've got, copper gets tied into, and when we hear, from healthy economic growth, that's what's happening on the planet. So the healthier the economies are, the more they're spending on infrastructure, and the more people are spending on things like electronics and cars and all that kind of stuff that uses copper. So that's a big driver on the demand side as well. But you touched on this, two fronts. Trump driving economic growth, number one, and how that may play into copper's demand side, but also on the let's call it the green revolution side. This is exactly what copper plays into as well. So, the people that are pushing for cleaner and greener, a planet, which now translates into stuff that's happening on the electrical vehicle side, renewable energy, renewables, wind, solar, and the infrastructure required to support those, and these EVs use a lot of copper. Your typical EV now will use up to 4 times as much copper in that car than your regular vehicle, and we all know how that's playing out. All these car companies are some of them are moving to straight electric vehicles only, and in the next 5 to 10 years there's going to be a huge shift with respect to that. So on copper, and just to note, copper it's 100% recyclable, so it's sustainable, and it's just going to be continued to be required as the planet grows and these initiatives grow on both sides.
Vince, so let's talk a little bit about the trade wars specifically with China and the U.S. here. What happens in a trade war regarding copper, and specifically what we're seeing between Trump and China? What are your thoughts on what happens domestically here in the U.S. and what happens in China regarding copper?
The trade war is an interesting one because it plays into, and I believe this is sentiment driven right now. It plays into, obviously, you hear a lot of rhetoric around, well, if this trade war continues, then it's going to start impacting the U.S. and China economically. So, so because copper's tied into economic health of nations, people start to think, well, if this rhetoric is out there, well, is copper going to flourish in this environment? I do think that is it's sentiment driven right now, and it is rhetoric driven right now, because the fundamentals on the copper trade are definitely pushing higher. And I do believe that the China and the U.S. are going to resolve this. I think it's going to happen sooner than later. I think they need to resolve this. What you might see, and I think that you'll see, is once this rhetoric alleviates itself, that you're going to see, I think copper's got a good chance at a quick little blip upwards. And I know that might be the first catalyst or the first move, because that's what I believe, even at 293 copper now, it's had a great move recently. That's what's still holding it back. Irrespective of that, the bigger driver is on the fundamental side. I touched base on, why the demand side, what's happening on the demand side of the equation. But probably the more important part of this equation is what's happening on the supply side. And, I believe this is going to outweigh anything that's happening with respect to the trade war rhetoric or even a mild slowdown in the economies if it happens. I don't believe it's going to happen quite in the near term, but is what's happening on the supply side. And this is worth touching on because on the supply side in the last 10 to 15 years, I guess there's two elements happening here that you've seen a huge change in grade curves. So, what was being mined by these big copper companies, and, this is some uniqueness in the copper market is that there's probably about, 20 big mines out there that supply most of the world's copper. And, those grade curves are declining. So what they used to mine at, say, 1.5% copper, they're now mining at maybe 0.6% copper. At the same time, costs in our industry have been going through the roof. When that happens, it just becomes so much more expensive to mine these lower grade deposits that they become uneconomic. And the only thing that fixes this are increases in copper prices. So these big mines in the copper space, it's not the same necessarily through the precious metal space. These big mines are multiple billions of dollars in capex to build. They can take up to 20 years or plus 20 years to find and get permitted and build, because these are big mines. So we're seeing, and you can look at global reports from analysts to strategics to whomever. There is a very clear consensus out there right now that even starting as early as this year and moving over the next decade, that we're going to start seeing shortages in the copper market. So I don't think that has not been translated yet into the copper prices, and also the copper prices I think have been held back a little, even with those fundamentals, because of the rhetoric that's happening around the trade war. So, I think copper's setting itself up for a brilliant trade here in the coming years.
So I guess what lumps copper into gold is maybe the mining sector or associations, it being a metal. So my question is, does copper need the price of gold to rise to have a sustainable run?
Fundamentally, no. Fundamentally, copper is, tied to very, very different things than gold is. It's tied to economies. It's tied to population growth. It's tied to, green. It's tied to all the things that we just discussed. Now, because gold is, and the precious metal side is such a powerful universe, that will help drive commodities. every commodity has its own kind of fundamental aspect to it and its own trade to it. But gold does help to a certain degree, kind of just bring light to all the commodity space. But in short, no. I mean, copper has its own its own fundamental characteristics that can drive it very differently than gold. Where copper will also tie a little more, and where gold is, maybe one relative feature is that they do tie into the U.S. dollar, for example. They're both traded in U.S. currency, but no, I think copper and some of the other base metals are clearly driven by different fundamentals.
Well, let's talk about Kutcho Copper, your company specifically. Talk about the assets, if you would. It's a copper company. It's right in the name. Let everyone know a little bit more about Kutcho Copper, and why investors should be paying attention to this company, especially in this environment.
Sure. So, what Kutcho has is we have a high grade. I talked a little bit about grades there. A high grade advanced stage copper project in a very safe jurisdiction, being in Canada, in British Columbia. Kutcho has a copper equivalent grade here of around 2.6%. And as I said, a lot of these big projects around the world right now are mining 0.4, 0.5, 0.6% copper. So that's a significant difference in grade. Now, Kutcho is a much smaller project than these big global copper projects, but that also provides its advantages as well. So, as I said, these big copper projects cost billions of dollars to build. Kutcho is even though Kutcho is one of the largest VMS copper deposits in Canada, in the top 5 at this point. We just put out a new resource update to verify that in the last couple of days. We're looking at a high margin project that, even through our feasibility study here, we're looking at kind of a sub $300 million project to build. These projects right now are in flavor. They're easily financeable compared to the multi-billion-dollar projects. So that makes it very attractive as well. So, just to reiterate, high grade, safe jurisdiction. This is an advanced stage project. We've completed a pre-feasibility study last year, which significantly de-risks the asset. We're now working towards our feasibility study, which again is another level of de-risk, and it's on the feasibility study that we look to build the project and put this into production. And I believe Kutcho is going to be a mine that will be in production in the coming years.
So Vince, let's talk a little bit about this endorsement, if you will, or a vote of confidence investment from Wheaton Precious Metals into Kutcho Copper. What are the implications of this? Why did they do that? Are they're looking to expand their resource? What can you expound on this a little more and really highlight the significance of this relationship?
Sure. Wheaton Precious, so the royalty companies and other strategics out there that really need projects to run their business model. They're out now looking at helping support projects, even at a bit of an earlier stage, to move them forward with capital to realize, what their end goal is to get that royalty or that stream active on the project. And so, Kutcho Copper, and listen, Wheaton's a great company. They've done exceptionally well, and these guys have a very, very strong technical team. So they know what they're doing. And when we approached them to help us finance, first of all, the acquisition, because we paid $28 million for this asset a year and a half ago. We needed help in acquiring the asset. So we did. It was a 3-prong approach with Wheaton. One, they lent us $20 million, so they provided a debt facility to help acquire the asset, the acquisition price itself. Wheaton's never done this before with a junior explorer or a junior developer. That's the first time they've ever done this, but that's a testament to they believe in this asset, and they believe this will be a producing mine. 2, they did a $4 million equity injection into us. And 3, we did a streaming arrangement with them on the precious metal component. which is only 8% of the revenue of our project, the silver and the gold. So it doesn't tap into our primary commodities, the copper and some zinc. And they valued that at 65 million US dollars. So this whole package together was north of 100 million Canadian dollars. But that $20 million and the $4 million, that's risk capital. And they also actually advanced us some of their that streaming arrangement up front. So that's all risk capital for them. They're into us for north of $30 million in risk capital, which these guys don't typically do. So nice to see that the big strategics and the corporates out there recognize good assets and are helping move these assets through the pipeline and into production. But the other thing too is there's not a lot of assets out there like this on the planet anymore. So that's why these guys are getting more competitive and coming down and identifying these assets and facilitating or helping facilitate the capital required to move them forward. So all of this speaks to, I guess, speaks to a testament to their confidence in this project and this asset.
Well, everyone, I feel like this is a very strategic time to be looking at copper, especially as we're starting to see some bullish momentum in it here in 2019. The stock market's a bit volatile. I feel like people are going to be looking towards real hard assets. And we're in this 10-year-long bull market, lots of volatility. We were talking even in the pre-interview here how so many asset classes are just so overvalued. And at some point, something's going to have to give, and the money will shift and transfer. And I guess with that, Vince, I want to pass it back to you. If you want to address that a little more, the markets and kind of where we are as a whole in the mining sector and why this is a strategic time to be looking at the mining sector.
Well, it is, and especially on these Canadian assets. And I'll tell you, the last couple of years, it hasn't been, Canada's kind of had this, call it a unique phenomenon happening that we've had this great cannabis trade. And, it looks like we've led the path or led the way in the world. So, that a lot of the risk capital that would have typically played in the resource space, we've seen move to the cannabis space over the last couple of years, and they've done great. They've made a lot of money. And there was a period of time there, a year and a half ago, that that risk capital moved to the Bitcoin space or trading that stuff too. So, there was fast money to be made. And I think, you haven't seen that in other markets. Australia is a big market of resource companies. If you look at across the board, the valuations in Australia are generally trading about 30 to 40% higher on these companies than we are here, because the focus of the risk capital is still in the resource space. Now, I think what's starting to happen just now here in Canada is the fast and the easy money has been taken off the cannabis trade. Those 10, 20 baggers that people were getting frequently aren't happening now. The market's been saturated. And, I know for a fact that a lot of from the independent, bankers in Canada, stuff like that, their desks are now starting to turn their heads back to the resource space. And that's where I believe you're going to see the risk capital starting to flow back into the Canadian resource space and the Canadian listed resource companies. If you look at, where we've been trading, from an opportunity perspective, we're trading at around a $20 million market cap. We paid 28 for this asset. We put $15 million into it last year. We're moving into our feasibility study where, it becomes, it's significantly de-risked. Another way to put it is we're trading at a 0.1 times price to net asset value. That's another way to kind of to rate the valuations of stories like ours. Typically, a base metal company like us at the stage that we're at and what we're moving into with our feasibility study, we could trade anywhere from a 0.3 to a 0.6 price to NAV. That is 3 to 6 times higher than where we are trading today. And I believe that's where, if you look at the comps out there, that's where we should be trading. I think, there with a few catalysts here coming, and I should reiterate that those economics and those valuations were based on our pre-feasibility study that we used $2.75 copper for. And we're very sensitive to the copper prices moving up. So, I think with a sentiment shift that I believe is coming in the general market, general resource space, also highlighting the copper space and what I think is coming with respect to the copper space. I think there's a great opportunity with respect to Kutcho Copper, and there are not many, at all, assets like this out there right now that are slated to go, move forward with the potential to be in production in the near future that can, lever off of all this that's happening. I think the timing is impeccable for us.
Well, Vince, Sorace, everybody of Kutcho Copper. Vince, if people want to learn more about the company, what you guys are doing, please let them know where they can go, what they can find, and if you would, mention the ticker symbols as well, both on the U.S. and Canadian side.
Sure. We trade, if you want more information about the company, please visit our website. We've got some good commentary and videos in our presentations and stuff in the copper industry as a whole. There's a couple good pieces there that you can learn a lot more about the green side of this as well, and EVs, et cetera, et cetera. And you can find that on our website at www.kutcho.ca. So that's KUTCHO.ca. We trade on the TSX Venture Exchange under the ticker symbol KC. We also trade on the pinks in the U.S. under the ticker symbol KCCFF.
Thanks, Vince, for coming on Crush the Street with us today. You didn't let us down whatsoever, so I really do appreciate your time.
Thanks for having me, Ken.